January the 5th, Tuesday. We are here from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. This program, as you know, is set aside for you to ask your questions, give your comments on any topic whatsoever. And I, as my role as host of this program, will endeavor to answer your question to the best of my ability from our Catholic faith, Scripture, our tradition, our saints, popes, doctors, councils, and anything that I can grab that will help you walk away satisfied that your question has been answered. I have been away for a long time, at least 3 weeks, I think. And at my age, health problems start to come in the way, let's say. And boy, I had some real doozies over the Christmas holidays and still do to a certain extent, but I am recuperating. First of all, I had my tooth pulled, and I have evidence of that right here. Here is my tooth. I told the dentist that I wanted this for posterity's sake, and here you have it. I don't know if you've ever seen your tooth up close, but that is my right side bottom molar, and I have a gap there now. And that caused an infection and went down to my neck, and we didn't know what the problem was. Nobody could figure it out until the dentist probably said, yeah, you probably have an infection. So I was on antibiotics for a while, and then it got really bad. And at one point, I was thriving. I was on my couch at 3 o'clock in the morning, moaning in absolute pain because the bacteria had made its way up my neck and was going to go to my brain next. Fortunately, I had the great idea of taking a lot of antibiotics at one time, which I did, and woke up about 3 or 4 hours later, and the pain was gone. And so we knew it was bacterial infection. And then I got prescribed another antibiotic and just got off of those a couple days ago. And then I found out through an x-ray that I had in my neck that I have a disc that's degenerating, and that's causing all kinds of pain, as you can probably imagine. Your day will come, believe me. And at any rate, I am able to do the program, so here I am. And we have a new slate that we're going to be using now in the start of 2021, which is I'm going to cover a certain topic each night for about 20 minutes or so, half hour at the most. And the topic we're going to cover tonight, by popular vote, that is, was the consecration of Russia done? And that seems to be a popular topic, and for good reason, because, wow, Fatima has occupied most of our 20th century. And so we're going to go over that. Then I have a lot of questions that have just remained on my desk that I haven't gotten to. We could probably look at those. But most of the program is going to be questions and answers, say 75% of it. But we're going to cover one topic, especially during the first 20 minutes, 30 minutes or so. And they gave me a list of topics that I'm supposed to cover. And of course, I can't find it. But yeah, this looks like it might be it here. So you want to know what we're going to do from now until the 27th of Wednesday the 27th of this year. Starting with tonight, did John Paul II consecrate Russia? So that question has even been narrowed down. And then tomorrow we're going to do, is John Paul II a saint? There's a doozy for you. And next Tuesday, the 12th, we'll be covering Orthodox Catholics who go to the Novus Ordo Mass. I'm going to need some clarification from my producer on that one. I guess that troubles some people. So, yeah, but it's about time we hit that, and so that is a good topic. Wednesday, January the 13th, what the Bible really teaches about flat Earth. Okay, we can do that one. And in case if anybody out there is wondering, I wrote a book on this, 740 pages long. I was commissioned to write that in the face of all this flat Earth stuff. So we'll be covering that. And I guess just the biblical part, not the science part or the history part. Because they have a long history. It actually goes back to the 1800s. And then on Tuesday, January the 19th, we'll be covering predestination, an error of Calvinism. That probably should be rephrased, because predestination is not an error. It's just that the Calvinists and many of the original Lutherans only believed in predestination. So we'll straighten that title out. And then Wednesday, January 20th, we're going to be doing, was Francis elected by coercion? Is he a valid pope? So you see, nothing we take lightly. We're gonna cover all the biggies. So buckle up. And then Tuesday, January 26th, Orthodoxy versus Catholicism. Should we use the filioque in the creed? Well, I can already answer that for you. The answer would be yes. Now we're just going to have to say why we do. Okay. And then Wednesday, January 27th, and this will fill out the month of January, will be, so you want to go to heaven, do this. And I guess that's sort of rhetorical. What do I have to do to go to heaven? Okay, so here you have it. So let's get into, now that I've wasted 10 minutes introducing it all, let's get into our topic today. And that, again, is, did John Paul II consecrate Russia? Okay. So like I always try to do, first of all, is answer with the short answer first, and then go into the long answer. Because the short answer always begs the question, well, is there more to it than just a yes or no answer? And of course there is. So, and I see that everybody's putting in their questions on the board, and that's very good. As you know, sometimes I can get through all the questions, sometimes I can't. And if I can't, sometimes I'll go to the next day and answer the questions from the previous day. I'm reminding you of all these things that I do because you may have forgotten, since it's been so long ago since I did one of these programs due to my health condition. At any rate, so let's get right into this. The short answer, of course, to did John Paul consecrate Russia is no. Okay. And I mean, whether you like John Paul II or you don't, or you're indifferent, I mean, you have to come down to the point where you ask yourself, did he mention the word Russia in his consecration, as was asked of Pius XII and Pius XI back in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. And whereas Pius XI certainly didn't consecrate Russia, and Pius XII consecrated the world in 1942, then consecrated Russia 10 years later in 1952, that's the criteria you're going to have to use, because you would have to say Pius XII didn't consecrate Russia, as he was told to do in 1942. As a matter of fact, Sister Lucy and Father Gonsalves, her confidant in this whole thing, made a deal with the Lord. It's like Abraham making a deal with the Lord. If there's 50 righteous, 40 righteous, 30 righteous, will you destroy the city? No, I won't. So Abraham's dickering with God. So we have that here. And we have a deal being made. And so Sister Lucy presents this deal to Jesus. And that deal is, can we have Pius XII consecrate the world with a special mention of Russia? And Jesus, not being anybody's fool, says, okay, if you think that's going to get him to do the consecration, any consecration, but he's not going to get the same blessing that he would have gotten if he just consecrated Russia as he was told. So, yeah, you can deal with Jesus, but, he's going to be fair to himself and all of heaven, of course. And the blessing's not going to be as great. So that's how he came around to consecrating the world in 1942. It wasn't that he said, well, I'm not going to consecrate Russia. I'm just going to consecrate the world and let the chips fall as they may. The deal was made. And that's how that came about. But in essence, he didn't consecrate Russia, nor did he give special mention to Russia. Okay. And the same thing, if you're going to be fair with Pius XII, as you are with John Paul II, you're going to have to say John Paul II more or less did the same thing. He might have been prepared to say Russia. He may have wanted to say Russia, but in the end, he didn't. He consecrated the world, just like Pius XII did. Okay. Now, of course, he did say, made some reference to those who are awaiting the consecration that, I forget the exact words, that was requested. But to me, that's an admission that, yeah, I'm not going to consecrate Russia. I'm going to leave that to somebody else in the future, if this is what's supposed to be done. Okay. So, if you're going to be fair with all the popes, and you're going to judge Pius the 12th as rigorously as you would need to judge John Paul II, basically both of them flubbed up. Okay. And unfortunately, that's why we're in the mess we're in. Okay. A lot of things could have gone a lot better in the 20th century if these popes had just bit the bullet and did what they were supposed to do. Unfortunately, there were a lot of contrary voices out there, shall we say, that were strong enough to stop Pius XI, the original pope that had received the message, from doing any consecration. World, Russia, Hawaii, whatever. He didn't do anything for 10 years, 1929 to 1939. And he's even the Pope that certified the miraculous nature of Fatima. So how can you do that and then not follow through with the consecration of Russia? And he was visited twice by our Lord. Twice. Pius XII had doubts about Fatima because he told Sister Lisa, well, why didn't the Lord come to me and tell me about this request? Why did he go through some peasant woman? And, so maybe there's a little ego pride there, and that was the problem. But Pius XI was visited by Jesus twice. And he was even given the example of Portugal, who had done a consecration and received all kinds of blessings from heaven because of it. And is even named in the third secret as, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith shall be preserved. Wow. Maybe they haven't had anticipated the fact that Portugal would do its own consecration and therefore be protected. It's dogma, at least. So that's why I say, John Paul II did not consecrate Russia. Now, of course, you got a lot of Fatima enthusiasts out there who believe that, you know, John Paul II can do no wrong. And, you know, he was our greatest pope that we ever had. And, you know, and he couldn't have succumbed to the fault of not consecrating Russia. So somewhere in all the language that he used, we'll just, you know, he intended to, he wanted to, but it just didn't come. And so for all intents and purposes, you know, he consecrated Russia. But they're just lying to themselves. Okay. And, you know, when you look at the results of the so-called consecration of Russia, first of all, Russia had already started to turn the corner long before John Paul II came around. As I pointed out in another show, after Pius XII had consecrated Russia in 1952, that was the last time Our Lady came to Sister Lucia. And she had come to Sister Lucia in May of 1952 and said, tell the Pope that I am still awaiting the consecration of Russia. And that's because, as I said, he had consecrated the world in 1942. He didn't have the bishops with him. And that was another thing that was requested in for the 1942. But, you know, we might let that go because it's, you know, the world war is going on. It's going to be hard for these bishops to even come to Rome to do anything like that. But there is not too much written about the fact that maybe Pius XII had contacted the bishops and said, you know, be with me in my consecration in 1942. Because he does use the word we. When he is talking about his consecration of Russia in 1952, and he writes his apostolic letter, he says, we consecrated the world in 1942. Well, who's the we? Well, that has to be the bishops involved with him. Okay. I don't think it means the lay people. And then he says, and we consecrated Russia in 1952 in his apostolic letter. We. So he's using we of 1942 with the we of 1952 and saying, we, the church, did this. Okay, so, but some people accuse him of not having the bishops in 1942. Okay. And of course, he didn't mention Russia like he was supposed to. So what happened? Well, he got half a blessing. Jesus said because he had not mentioned Russia, that the war was going to go on for 3 more years. And it was a terrible war. And as a matter of fact, Jesus, being nobody's fool, said, I'm going to take this opportunity that you did not mention Russia in the 1942 consecration, and I'm going to chastise the world for its sins. Okay, for 3 years, 3 more years. Now it's a world war. That means the whole world is suffering. So Jesus is using this world war to chastise the world for its sins because Pius XII did not mention Russia. Okay, so there, Jesus was true to his word. You know, when they made the deal that, you know, the Sister Lucia and Father Gonsalves said, well, you know, if we get Pius XII to consecrate the world, you know, maybe he'll be more apt to doing the consecration. And their guess was apparently correct. And all he has to do is mention Russia. How's that? Jesus, as I said, yeah, okay, that's fine. I'm just going to cut the blessing in half. How's that? Okay, so the world goes, if Pius had mentioned Russia, just mentioned Russia in his 1942 consecration, World War II would have come to an end that year. Okay, so in that sense, the Pope is responsible for all the deaths that occurred for that 3-year period. Can you imagine having that on your soul? My goodness. Not only the deaths, the tragedies all around the world, suffering, disease, death, you name it. People not becoming Christians because of that. Wow, what a burden that he had to carry. And then Jesus said, and after that, the war will come to an end and you will have peace. You will have peace. So in John Paul II's reign, we had two other things that happened. Well, three other things of major importance. John Paul II, as I said, now let me also point out this book we have. This is a book that I wrote with John Salza in 2013. And good bedtime reading for you. We uncovered as many facts as we possibly could when we wrote this book. And I and John were of the opinion that Pius XII's attempts were minuscule, if anything. And that the real burden of this rested on John Paul II, because he took it under his own wing to try to fulfill this, Fatima prophecy. And so most of the book concentrates on John Paul II, although, as you can see, there were 7 popes who basically all failed. If they were going to take responsibility, if they, as Pope, believe that the buck stops here, and if the consecration is going to be done, it's going to be done under my decision, my authority, my performance, all of them failed. 7 of them. And now we have 8 that have failed because Francis is nowhere near. Although sometimes he pulls rabbits out of the hat and you never know what he's going to do. He just may just do a consecration of Russia, just to be nasty. Who knows what his motivations are. But so this book came out and I pointed out some very disturbing things about John Paul II. Now, mind you, I said that Our Lady stopped communicating with Sister Lucia in 1952 after she told Sister Lucia to tell Pius XII she's still awaiting the consecration of Russia. 2 months later, in July 1952, Pius consecrates Russia. Now, there's some ins and outs about that. It wasn't like, he says, well, I'm doing this because of the Fatima prophecies. He didn't mention Fatima at all in this apostolic letter. It was actually a request from people, Catholics in Russia, that the Pope would consecrate Russia. And they have a vested interest to have their country consecrated, okay? But it just happened to coincide with the Fatima prophecies, of course. So we could say that the consecration that Pius XII did for the Catholic Russian people at their request did double duty, so to speak, in fulfilling their request and also fulfilling heaven's request. Why might this be the case? Well, as I said, after 1952, there's no more communication from Our Lady. It's over. The next time Sister Lucia is talking about Fatima, she's talking to Father Fuentes in her 1957 interview. And she tells him, he asks her, is everything okay, basically? And she said, no. And then her next statement is something about the people are not listening. They're not following. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. Okay. Now, a lot of Fatimists have looked at that answer that she gave and said, well, obviously then the consecration wasn't done in 1952. That is the consecration of Russia. But that's not what she says at all. She doesn't even mention Russia, doesn't mention the consecration. Father Fuentes asked her, what's wrong? And she just spills her guts and says, nobody's following this. She's talking about clerics and lay people. And she says, unless prayers and sacrifices are done, this world is going to go into a cataclysm like you've never seen before. And so everybody's starting to get worried. Well, if the Pope would only do the consecration, we could avoid this cataclysm. But that's not what Sister Lucia said. She said the people have to do prayers and sacrifices in order to avoid this soon to come cataclysm. Okay. Not that she didn't say that the consecration of Russia needs to be done in her interview with Father Fuentes, but the people have to pray and sacrifice. So let's move forward a few years. 1957, let's go to 1962. What happened? Well, we have Russia and the United States going head to head in the Atlantic Ocean. And it's all a matter of who's going to blink first. And they all had their fingers on the red button, ready to push it for nuclear war. Now, I'm not saying that that's the cataclysm that Sister Lucia was talking about, but it could be. I think it's a good candidate. I can't think of another cataclysm, unless there's some giant earthquake or something. But nuclear war, wow. Once that button's pushed, it's over. Those that are alive are going to wish they were dead. That's how bad it can be. So what does this tell us? Well, it must have been the prayers and sacrifices of the people that actually was fulfilled in order for us to avoid that prediction of a cataclysm that was going to come, according to Sister Lucia, who got it from Our Lady. Okay, so, but again, let me stress, there was no call for a consecration of Russia again in 1957. It just doesn't come up. Okay. What's needed now that the consecration has been done is for the people now to fall in line with what that consecration was designed for, and that is for the people themselves, the world at large, to heed it and live by it, you see. So what am I saying all this for? Well, because John Paul II was never approached by heaven to do a consecration. That came up from his own thinking. And apparently he was of the impression that Pius XII's consecration of Russia in 1952 wasn't sufficient. And that's why he needed to do it again. That's his own decision. Okay. But that's a decision that is not based on heaven. Nobody came to John Paul II and said, Pius XII failed. It's now time for you to pick up the mantle and consecrate Russia. Okay. And not only did he not consecrate Russia, John Paul II, he had three or four other times prior to 1984 where he attempted a consecration or an entrustment. 1981, 82, 83, and then the final one came in 1984, March 25th, where he was supposed to, really consecrate Russia. And in neither of those instances did he consecrate Russia. Okay, so that's why I'm saying he didn't consecrate Russia. Not a word was said about Russia. Okay, so if I'm going to be fair with Pius XII and look at his follies and foibles, I'm certainly going to do the same thing with John Paul II. Okay. There are two other things that happened with John Paul II. One is there were a lot of wars going on in his pontificate. 52 in all. Wars, skirmishes, conflicts all across the world. A good number of them were civil wars. Okay, so we can let those go maybe. But there were some major conflicts going on. the 80s, 90s, they were not pleasant times. There were people making a lot of money, but the world was in quite a few battles. So you're thinking, well, if John Paul wants world peace, we certainly have little evidence of it in his pontificate. His pontificate ended in 2005. And you can look this up yourself on Wikipedia. Show me all the wars that have happened between this date and this date, and it'll show you. So there was no fruit, basically. We did see fruit in Russia, and I'll get to that in a minute. But John Paul didn't consecrate Russia. He consecrated the world. And if you're consecrating the world, you would figure the world's going to have world peace. Because that was the promise, wasn't it? From Our Lady and our Lord. But as I said, back in 1940s, early 1940s, when Pius XII had failed to consecrate Russia, Jesus said, okay, we're going to have 3 more years of war. Then after that, you're going to have peace, which they did, 1945. But we really didn't have that with John Paul. We have one war after another. As a matter of fact, a lot of Fatimists point to 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, as, the feather in the hat for John Paul II. But, right after that, we had the Gulf War, and we had the Bosnia-Herzegovina conflict in the very next year, 1991. And it was the Pope's, John Paul II's right-hand man at that time, his biographer, Stanislaus Ziewicz, who said that all those wishes for peace that we thought had come because of the consecration, we discovered were just an illusion. And I write this in the book. He said that himself. Okay. There's an admission that the fruit that's supposed to come from this supposed consecration of Russia in 1984 really produced no fruit. Okay. Possibly we could say that if and then we already said heaven didn't ask him, but let's just say heaven said, okay, here's John Paul II. He's going to do a consecration. And we can give him some blessing. And so the Berlin Wall falls down. Okay. And we have the beginning of the end of communism, at least in Russia. Okay. The question is that what caused the fall of communism in Russia, or had it been coming many decades prior? Well, when I look at history now, I see, you can't say that the fall of communism in 1989 is just a blip on the radar screen that just suddenly happened. No, this was in preparation right after Pius XII had done his consecration of Russia. Right after that, you got the Cuban Missile Crisis that goes in the favor of the U.S., and there's no nuclear war. 1964, Russia makes a pact with the U.S. To limit nuclear weapons, and did again so in the late 1970s and with the SALT talks and all that stuff. They had SALT 1 and SALT 2. Then we had the Helsinki Accords, and so the time of Russia changing is being seen right before our eyes, where the peace that Jesus said started in 1945 is progressing. Yeah, there are skirmishes all over the world, but with Russia, things are changing. Now, yeah, they're still communist in the 60s, 70s, and most of the 80s, okay? But things are moving along. And we have peace with Russia. Russia is not pushing the red button and annihilating nations any longer. Okay, most of the wars that Russia has been in the 60s, 70s, and 80s have been defensive wars. Most of them. wherein they're not the aggressor, they're the defender of their republics. And the republics are leaving, one by one. Ukraine, all kinds of republics are leaving Russia, and Russia's trying to stop the hemorrhage, so to speak. And that's the nature of the wars that are going on, because Russia's territory is being taken away. But then, you have Gorbachev coming along, and after him, you have Yeltsin, and they're allowing Christianity to flourish in Russia. Okay. And by 1993, and I did make a mistake before. I said they made Christianity the state religion. They didn't actually do that. But what they said was the Christian religion, or religion in general, can have all freedom in Russia in their 1993 constitution. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say was this whole advancement of Russia to the point where they are today, where they're totally opposite of what they were in 1917 under the Bolsheviks and Lenin. Okay, whereas they were total atheists then, and were trying to suppress Christianity in Russia. Today, it's 180 degrees different. They're promoting Christianity, at least Russian Orthodoxy, in Russia. All the moral ills that they have had, abortion, homosexuality, contraception. I looked up about half a dozen of these categories, and whereas we are under the impression that Russia leads the world in all these immoral categories, they're hardly at the top of any of them any longer. Okay, so the one that they're trying to work on right now is alcoholism, but there's other countries in Europe that are right next to them. It's not like Russia's way up here and all the other countries are down here. No, Russia just happens to be has the most alcoholism, but there's other countries right next to them in Europe. Okay, so if you look up all these stats, you're seeing, wow, major changes have occurred in Russia, both in the moral areas, in the war areas, and definitely in allowing Christianity to be part and parcel with Russian life. But again, all these things had started after Pius XII had consecrated Russia in 1952. Okay, slowly but surely they came. And why did they come slowly? Well, because Pius XII didn't do the consecration the way he was supposed to do it. He made a deal with Jesus, and Jesus, said, okay, if that's the way you want it, then we'll have 3 more years of war, and then you'll have peace. And then on top of that, he said, and the conversion of Russia will come later. Whereas it could have come in the 1940s, Jesus says, yeah, I'm going to postpone that because you didn't do the consecration correctly. So whereas you're going to get some blessing, you're not going to get all the blessing. It's going to be in 2 parts. So I'll give you the period of peace starting in 1945, and then afterwards, Russia will be converted. And what have we seen? Russia has been converted. As far as allowing Christianity to come back to the people as it was pre-1917, that's exactly what we've seen. Heaven wasn't complaining about the Romanov dynasty for the 5 centuries that they were in control about their Christianity. Didn't say a word. It was only when the atheists under the Bolsheviks came in 1917 that heaven stepped in and said, we have to put a stop to this, you see. So basically, Russia's right back where it was in pre-1917 days. Okay, and Putin, he's even a greater exemplar of this whole thing, of the things that he's trying to do for Russia. The real boogeyman today is in the United States. When you compare United States and Russia, Russia far exceeds the United States in many categories, moral categories, and Christian categories. If it wasn't for the evangelicals that we have today, 70 million of them, and at least some faithful Catholics, we would be in a dearth of Christianity in this land. And we're marching hand in hand, toward communism like we've never seen it before. The real threat out there today is China. They've been communists probably for 5,000 years and have no intentions of changing. They're as dead as a doornail spiritually when compared to Russia. And that's where the real threat. But a lot of the, the Fatimists out there will say, oh, no, Russia's the big boogeyman. We got to stop Russia. Yeah, that's about as true as it was when they tried to impeach Trump for the, Russia collusion. It's all false. Okay. So the other thing about John Paul II, I said there were three things. Not only did he not mention Russia, not only was the world at total war, and not only was Russia changing because of previous decades, not because all of a sudden in 1989 Russia just changes. No, this was something that was brewing over the decades since the 1950s. And it came just the way our Lord said it would come, slowly, because of the way Pius XII did his consecration. He didn't do it correctly. Fortunately, he did finally consecrate Russia in 1952, and we're reaping the blessings of that. Okay. And that's why Russia has changed. And as Jesus said, the conversion will come later. Well, yeah, it was about 50 years later. Okay. 40 years later, 30 years later, but it's been getting better ever since. And the thing about John Paul II is, and a lot of people just sort of ignore this. Like they think so highly of John Paul II that they just can't fathom this Pope doing what I'm going to tell you he did. And it's just like, it's very strange to me. But at any rate, he did his consecration of the world in 1984, and then 2.5 years later, he is calling all the pagan religions of the world together in the Assisi interreligious prayer meetings. And was it October of 1986, they have this big conflagration of all the world's religions, Protestant, Hindus, you name it, Buddhists, everybody comes to Assisi and they're all praying to their own gods, their false gods. For what? 2 words: world peace. I feel like I'm at a Miss America pageant when they get up and give their speeches. What would you like to see happen in the world? World peace. We've all heard that joke. Well, that's what it seemed like to me with this whole, interreligious prayer meeting. We all want world peace, world peace. Well, the funny thing is, isn't world peace exactly what Our Lady had promised if the Pope would do a valid consecration and actually name Russia in the statement? So it's like, and wasn't it supposed to be where all the bishops were supposed to come? And the Pope was supposed to consecrate Russia with the bishops? Imagine if you can invite the world's pagan religions to come to Assisi in Italy, couldn't you invite the bishops of the Catholic Church to come to Rome to help the Pope do a valid consecration of Russia? This is assuming that John Paul II has the sanction from heaven to do a consecration, and that somehow heaven has rejected Pius XII's consecrations, and now we're going to depend on John Paul II. Where did heaven say that? Where did heaven reject Pius XII's 1952 consecration of Russia? Nowhere. Sister Lucy never says it, as I had pointed out in the 1957 interview with Father Fuentes. She just says the people weren't obeying. That's it. Not that the Pope did a bad consecration. It was hard enough getting Pius XII to get to the throne to do the consecration, for Pete's sake. And here he mentions the word Russia. Wow, we'll take that and run. Russia. Wow, we'll take that and run. Okay, so, assuming that John Paul II is even correct in thinking that Pius XII's consecration is of no consequence and that he has the right to decide himself to do a consecration, and then flubs it up and doesn't mention Russia, so he's no better than Pius XII. And then he calls the interreligious prayer meetings in 1986 with pagan religions praying to their false gods and having incense to go up to heaven with the Buddhists, and all kinds of things are going on that people were complaining about. But because he's John Paul II, everybody just sort of gives a wink and a nod and says, no biggie, just the Pope. But wow, with Pope Francis, these same people that were defending John Paul II now want to put an axe through the heart of Francis for Pachamama. Okay, well, what changed? Tell me what's different than allowing a Buddhist to pray with his incense to heaven for world peace and Pope Francis parading Pachamama around. What's the difference? Okay, so all those who were giving John Paul II a nice, pass should take a look, a second look. Why were things so bad? Well, when you break the first commandment, things are going to be pretty bad. Go read the Old Testament. See what God did to them for breaking the first commandment. Yeah, they went to Babylon, Assyria, and were conquered by the Romans. Okay, so, and it's like 2.5 years right after he supposedly did this consecration of Russia that they say he did. Apparently he wasn't seeing world peace. So, I got an idea. Let's call the pagans together and have them pray to their gods for world peace, since our God's not giving us world peace. And I did a consecration all on my own effort. Heaven didn't tell me to do it, but I'm going to do it. And I didn't even do it right. And I don't have world peace, so it's all heaven's fault. So let's call the world religions together and have them pray to their pagan gods, and maybe we'll get something done. Yeah. Okay. So this is another strike against John Paul II. What in the world are these pagan religions doing in Assisi? Praying to their false gods. My gosh, if there's ever a slap in the face to heaven, that was it. But it didn't stop there. Then he had 4 more in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Smaller ones, but they were basically the same thing as Assisi. And then we had the grand finale in 2002, another Assisi. That was even more elaborate than Assisi 1 in 1986. So this man did not learn his lesson. He believed from his reading of Vatican II, Gaudium et Spes, I think it was section 2, paragraph 2, section 9, something like that. One little sentence he claimed that was the basis for his having the Assisi meetings. Wow. And then we had a couple of things happen in the 1990s that he wrote, some encyclicals that were tending toward the same way. Yeah, so not only did he not consecrate Russia, to answer the question that we began with, he tripped and falled and stumbled and fell flat on his face throughout his pontificate. And here he is gathering pagans from the world between 1986 and 2002. What is that? 16 years. And all the while, underneath his nose, we have the homosexual pedophile scandal going on that had been brewing since the early 1960s, and then got worse in the 70s and the 80s. And by the time we got to the 90s, we had half our priesthood, at least in the United States, who were homosexual, and 1/3 of our bishopric, right underneath his nose. And when it was brought to his attention, in the case of Father Maciel, he just says, well, no, this is a plot. This is a conspiracy. Things like this don't happen in the Catholic Church. And let the man go. And here he is raping women, raping, his students, Father Maciel, making millions of dollars, influencing people all over the world with his fake religion. And John Paul does not a thing about it, because he just doesn't want to believe it. He thought he was so good, so pious, so this, so that nothing like that could happen in his pontificate. Okay. And then in 2000, when they allowed the interpretation of the Fatima secrets to come out, which they called the secrets, of course, there's, many people, including myself, who believe they haven't revealed it all. Because the third secret, you can tell, is leading right into an apostasy in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. Yeah, everything leads to that. And the visions that we've had before, Marian visions from Quito, Ecuador in the 1600s, Akita, Japan in 1973, they just dovetail right in with the third secret and tell us about this apostasy. Okay, so what the point is that I'm trying to make is the Pope John Paul II thinks he's such a star that he makes himself the bishop in white of the third secret. The bishop that's traveling up the mountain and sees the dead bodies everywhere, and the fact that he got shot by Ali Aka, in 1981. Well, that's the arrows and all this to come and kill the Pope. Well, everybody thought that was crazy. It was only the diehard fans of John Paul II who just oohed and awed over it. But, even the newspaper said, come on. I mean, and this is his interpretation, that he's the bishop in white. Wow, even Pius XII didn't do any of that. So, and, when I add it all up, in my mind, I'm subservient to the church, but as I said many times on this program, I'm not stupid. Okay? These things just don't add up. And so for all those reasons, no. Not only did he not consecrate Russia, he wasn't even called upon to consecrate Russia. We have no indication from heaven that it rejected Pius XII's consecration of Russia in 1952. And if Kevin hadn't rejected it, what business does John Paul II have of declaring it rejected, and he's going to do it all over again and then flub it up at the same time? I mean, that doesn't add up. So, yeah, those of you who are looking with a microscope into the life and teachings of Pope Francis, turn them toward John Paul II, and you're going to find out where it all started, because that's where Francis is getting his cue from. Okay, and I've been saying this for years, and I hope that we can come to that point where we begin to see that, yeah, all these popes, okay, all of them are guilty. They're all guilty in one form or to one degree or another for the fiasco that we've had on this whole Fatima thing. But I am of the opinion, and it's not expressed in this book, but will be in another book, that consecration has already been done. Heaven has done its best to answer that consecration with the change in Russia that we have seen over the last, 80 years or so, now going on 90 and 100 years. That's the best heaven could do. And we already had that indication from Jesus himself, when he said, well, Pius, okay, you did a consecration, great. The blessing is going to be cut in half, and it's going to come slowly. You know, we already had that message from heaven. They're nobody's fool. So that's what we've had to wait for so long, for Russia to change. Now Russia's basically out of the picture. You know, their economy is about as big as New York State. They're not what they used to be militarily. But they've changed. Christianity is now part and parcel with Russia. China is the enemy today. Like I said, they've been communist for 5,000 years and have held their people under oppression for 5,000 years with no intent on changing. It's a capitalist-driven hierarchy that makes money off of the slaves of the billion people in China. And now they're getting all the elites from the United States and Europe to come and join. Well, we'll help you make even more money, and we'll be the conduit for it. We'll just use our slave labor, and you can come over here and have any business you want. All the tech businesses, you know, Google, Facebook, Twitter, you know, even Dell Computer. Why did Dell become such a worldwide name and community? Because they have them all built in China by slave labor in China. We all know what's going on. But heck, we're capitalists. We're out here to make money. We're not here to moralize. That's what's been going on. Okay, that's why you have this big tussle between the Democrats and Republicans. Trump's the one that wants to stop it. And they know he wants to stop it, and that's why they stopped him. Okay? So that's the real enemy today. It's not Russia, it's China. All right, so I spent how long on that? 50 minutes. Sorry. And that leaves precious little time for your questions, but I had to say it. All right, somebody says here, before I go up to the top, because Russia had already spread its errors around the world when St. John Paul II made the consecration to the world, it did satisfy Our Lady's request because communism had spread. Communism had spread. I don't know what John Paul II's consecration has anything to do with it then. Communism had already spread. Yeah. And that's why Jesus came to Pius XII and said, you need to do, well, actually he came to Pius XI. You need to do this consecration now. Now. Because what was the words afterwards? Because if you don't, it's going to be too late. See, that's the key phrase there. It's going to be too late. And already in 1942, it was just like almost too late. The war had come starting in 1938, late 1938. And, you know, so what, 3 years goes by and Pius XII is still struggling with whether he's going to do the consecration or not. And then he finally does it. But yeah, it's too late. The war came. Okay. The whole reason that Our Lady came to Sister Lucia in 1929 was to avoid the war. She had told her in 1917, this war is going to come to an end shortly because of Pius XV's devotion to Mary. But she said, look, if Russia's not consecrated and the people don't turn from their sins, there's going to be a worse war that's going to come. And so that's why she came in 1929 to tell Sister Lucia, who told Pius XI in 1930, you need to do this now. Otherwise, the war is going to come, as Our Lady prophesied, you see. Otherwise, it's going to be too late. And so by the time Pius XII gets around to doing the consecration, it's already too late. Okay? So what I'm trying to say here is the fulfillment of the Fatima prophecy is local. It deals with the people of that time, not people 50 years or 100 years later who have nothing to do with that local scene. Everything's changed in Russia now. Okay, there's really no reason to do a consecration of Russia now, because the original premise to do it was because it turned atheist in 1917 under the Bolsheviks. That's no longer the case now. Okay, so the whole thing is academic, if I can use that word. So, all right. I'm going to go up to the top here, see what kind of questions we have for tonight. David Herster says the church in Russia has increased by 350% since the fall of the USSR, with over 800 full monasteries. Yeah. I've seen statistics like that as well, David, and they're astounding, really. Russia was consecrated when Saint Vladimir was baptized. What year was that, John Beeler? There was a statement that Our Lady made in 1917 to Sister Lucia, and she said, Russia, in the end, Russia will be consecrated. And it was in 1952. That's in the end. Okay. And then she says at the end of that, she says, because it has been entrusted to her. I puzzled over that for a long time. And then I found it was in the 11th century that Russia as a nation was entrusted to Our Lady sometime in the 11th century, and I forget the details of it. But that I said, okay, that's probably it. Because I can't think of any other time that Russia was entrusted to Our Lady. So that may have been the impetus for it. All right, let me go on and all right, so David continues and says, some say it was consecrated and some say it was not. Yeah, I'm very aware of that. And the fact is that in 1952, Pius XII consecrated Russia, and he wrote an apostolic letter to that effect and said, we are consecrating Russia just as we consecrated the world in 1942. Now, you either take that as it is stated, or you just dismiss it and saying the Pope doesn't know what he's talking about. Because there's no in between. Okay. Now, look, the Pope was asked by heaven to do this consecration. This transpired over how many years? 13 years with Pius XII alone. And if heaven is involved, that's where I'm going to place my bets. Heaven was not involved with John Paul II. He did that on his own. But Pius XII was asked specifically when Our Lady came to Sister Lucia in May 1952 and tell the Pope, she said, that I am still awaiting the consecration of Russia. 2 months later, he did that consecration, and then we'd hear not another word from heaven. It's over. Okay. So that's where I'm going to place my bets. All right. COVID-19 has proven that the church is not a house of God or popes, HV special qualities to bless. The clergy or laity, holy oils, mass for the sick, speak in tongues, call upon the Spirit. That may be true to a certain extent there. Now I lost your name because this thing's not working. There comes a point where God says, don't even bother to pray for this people. Don't sacrifice for them. Don't pray for them. Several times in the Old Testament, when Israel reached the height of its apostasy, where there was no turning around, it was over. That was it. They were heading right to destruction. You know, he tells Jeremiah, he tells Isaiah, don't even bother praying for them. I'm not going to listen. Okay. We could be at that point right now. And it just seems to getting worse. Every pontificate we have, it just seems to be getting worse. Sometimes we had hope in Benedict and he failed us. And now we got this monster that's in the papal chair right now. And who knows what's going to happen after him. But it gets so bad, I mean, think about it. Homosexuality, pedophilia, just to name one instance of spiritual aberration in our day that is unprecedented in our church. To even think that priests, bishops could be in this lifestyle is disgusting. That's how bad it's got. So I wouldn't be surprised if God is basically saying, don't bother praying. I'm not listening. Okay, it's just a matter of time now. Al Bowley says Pope John Paul I was killed. Yeah, but I don't know how you entered that into the equation, actually. He was here for 33 days. He had visited Fatima prior to his death. He was very interested in it. But again, you're going to have to hear the voice from heaven, like it was given to Pius XI and Pius XII. I mean, Jesus came from heaven. Our Lady came talking to these two popes. This is where the consecration is. And this is where the concentration is from heaven. It's not from in the future with some future pope, John Paul I included. Okay. Unless they received a message where heaven says, I'm sorry, yeah, I know Pius XII tried his best, but he didn't do it correctly, and that's all, we're waiting for somebody. No, we have no message from heaven like that at all. Okay. We have total silence from heaven after 1952. And then you have the whole issue about the fake Sister Lucy possibility. Okay. When I look at those two profiles of the proclaimed Sister Lucy post 1958 and the prior Sister Lucy pre 1958, Sister Lucy, they just are not the same people. Okay. I'm no expert, but I've read some experts and they agree mostly. There is some, little controversy there, but when you look at the profile of Sister Lucy, there's some people that have a profile that you can put a ruler against their profile and their forehead matches their chin and matches their nose. You're just straight like a line. Mine isn't that way, but there are people that are that way. But so that's the pre-1958 Sister Lucy. The post-1958 Sister Lucy has a forehead that goes like this, and then a chin that goes out like this, and a nose that, is like, how is it? It goes like this. I mean, it's just totally different than the pre-1958 Sister Lucy. So, wow. How this woman, who she is, I hope they continue to work on that, but that's a whole issue that has to be taken into account. You can't dismiss it, okay? Even though we don't know absolutely whether they were two different people, you have to consider that evidence in your whole understanding of this issue. Especially when she changed her mind. First she says, oh yeah, the 1984 consecration wasn't a valid consecration. 4 times she said it, and then all of a sudden in 1989, she changes her mind, and then she meets John Paul, and he says, I don't want you talking about this anymore, and shuts her up, basically, for the rest of her life. So maybe the lady didn't know what to say. Who knows? All right. Let me keep going here. David Herster says, Sister Lucia was obedient and said what she was told to say because obedience is better than sacrifice. Yeah, but, I agree with that, but that's from, Hosea chapter 6. That's what the Lord told Israel. You know, I don't want to see your disgusting sacrifices any longer if you're not going to obey me. Okay, but that's in a different context. That's when it comes down to obeying, the church gives us our matter of conscience, because we cannot go against our conscience. And if we know that a higher up is telling us something that's wrong, or telling us to do something that's wrong, we don't have to listen to them. Okay, we respect their authority, just like Jesus said was in Matthew 23, when he's talking about the Pharisees and all those that had control in Israel. You give them their due respect because they're in authority, but don't do as they do. Okay. So in that sense, we have the right not to obey them when they tell us something that's not right. They have their authority, and God gave them the authority, and he'll take it away when he wants to take it away. But there are certain limits to how much influence they can have on us. All right. World War II, Tom Teo says, World War II is not the Lord's chastisement of the world. Priests like McCarrick were still enjoying their disguised pedophilia priesthood till 2021. Well, see, Tom, this is where you need to distinguish between our day and their day. Okay, that's what I was trying to say before. Fatima was a local issue. And when I say local, I don't mean geographically, I mean time-wise. Okay. There was a war going on, World War I. We were warned that World War II would come unless the consecration was done and people started to obey. Jesus came to Pius XI twice, told him, do this, because if you know it's going to be too late. Well, too late for what? The 20th century, late 20th century, early 21st century? No. Okay, it had to be too late for that time, that local time, because World War II was going to come. And if the consecration wasn't done, then World War II would come and the world would suffer. So Jesus was right. It was too late. Okay. And he said that to Pius XI in the early or the mid-1930s. Okay. So that's what I'm talking about. You have to understand, as a local time period, almost all Marian apparitions are that way. The only one that isn't is Quito, Ecuador, which was prophesied 1600s and for the future, 20th century. And she actually names the 20th century in her prophecy. But all the other Marian apparitions are all local. They deal with local events at a local time. Okay. And so this idea of stretching out Fatima until the 21st century, that, we could still have it done there, I think is far-fetched. Okay. All right. Now you guys keep adding stuff here, so my cursor keeps moving and I can't keep track of where I am. I might have skipped some of you because I can't get this cursor to work the way I want it to, but let me just keep going here. And Katie says, gee, let me thank all the popes for bringing us to this catastrophic point in history. Nice. Yeah. So be glad, Katie, that you're not in that position to have authority wherein you might make the same mistake. Yeah, everybody wants to be in authority, and that's why James tells us in James chapter 3, verse 1, let not many of you be in authority, because you will be judged the harshest. So now, David says here, nuclear war is part of the third secret that is still looming. Well, what I would say, David, is that the period of peace issue and the conversion of Russia issue, that's been taken care of. And that's because of the consecration of Russia in 1952 by Pius XII and this consecration of the world in 1942. That's as much as heaven was going to get out of us. And that's why she's silent ever since then. But there's a third dimension to the Fatima issue, and that is the prophecy of the demise of the church. Okay. So while Russia is converting and there's peace between the world and Russia in the 20th century, what's brewing is the third dimension covered in the third secret. And that is the infiltration of the devil into the church to disrupt its doctrine, its practices, and everything else, which is exactly where we are today. So in that sense, yes, I would agree with you that the third secret is still unfolding even today. Okay, whereas the other two dimensions of the secret are done. They're over. Okay. Unless heaven comes back and asks for a consecration of Russia, which it's not going to happen. Okay. Russia is not the same as it was in 1917. If anything, heaven may come back and ask for a consecration of China. Yeah, that would help. Okay. But see, China really has no Christian history. It's piecemeal, if anything. So we're not going to depend on heaven coming back and asking for a consecration in China. But the third secret, after the etc., of course, is still going on and still unfolding. And who knows where it's going to end. We have Pope Francis in there showing that it's not over yet. Okay, it's still unfolding. Okay, thank you, Nancy, for your sympathy for my health problem. All right. All right, replying to James Nersheimer, V2, was pastoral, not ecumenical and binding. No, I mean, well, you're both right. I mean, it was pastoral, but it was also ecumenical. Okay, it was an ecumenical council. Don't forget that. And it was binding. Yes, it was binding. It's not. We don't have a council and they teach certain things and said, well, don't worry, it's not binding. You know, you don't have to worry about it. No, that's not the way it works. Okay, everything Vatican II said is binding on us. It's a matter of degree how it's binding on us, but it's binding. Okay, the Pope signed off on all 16 documents and said, you know, this is required by the Catholic faithful to obey. Okay, that's a council. That's an ecumenical. That's the highest you can get. All right. So you can't start your own church and say, well, I'm going to be greater than church, and I'm going to just say that the church's documents just don't have any applicability here, and I'm not bound by them. No, that's not the way it works. That's Protestantism. Okay, and then you go off and you make your own church. Al says, do you think John Paul I would have consecrated Russia had he not been killed? I couldn't tell you, Al. Couldn't tell you. He's a puzzle. All right, let me see how we're going here. Then will there be 3 days of darkness? I don't think so, Al. I've looked at those prophecies and I see where they get them, how they're interpreting scripture, and I don't think it's kosher. Okay, I'm just my opinion. Okay, when you come here, you're going to get my opinion, but I just don't believe how they're interpreting scripture or how they're putting these things together. Diddy Kong. A lot of new names here I haven't seen at all, hardly ever. So I'm wondering whether we have trolls coming or. All right, but this one says consecration was never done, so a pope will be killed according to the parallel with the third failed consecration of France. Yeah, but see, you're assuming there is a parallel with the consecration of Jesus in France. The only thing Jesus did for Pius XI was, he said, if you don't do it, you're going to suffer the same punishment they did. But he's making no parallel, you see, saying that Pius XII is not going to do the consecration. Okay, as a matter of fact, that's what saved the world. When Pius XII actually did the consecration of Russia after he had been asked again by Our Lady to do it, and he did it, that's what saved the world from Russian aggression. Everything changed after that. Okay, that's why they're making all kinds of peace treaties with the U.S. What, about half a dozen of them in the latter half of the 20th century. Okay, if he hadn't consecrated Russia, that wouldn't have happened. Okay, so yeah, so that's where people make a mistake, that the kings of France and their consecration, dovetail with the consecration of Fatima. No, it does not. Okay, it's two different things. All right. Peace since 1945, New World Order since 1945. Oh yeah. I didn't say that you wouldn't have the underworld ceasing its activity in 1945. Okay. Things are, and the church still went on its merry way into apostasy after that, didn't she? So yeah, and that's why we have all the problems we have now. Okay, so here's the other dimension of the Fatima secret. Okay, the peace came, because they weren't pointing guns at each other anymore or threatening with nuclear weapons, and we could at least live in the world. Okay, that's what I mean by peace. But as far as the underworld and all its machinations, that still continues. Okay. Big Daddy says, no, Russia has not been consecrated because John Paul II failed to do what Mary asked him to do. No, Mary didn't ask John Paul to do it. See, that's the whole thing. She asked Pius XII to do it, and he did it in 1952. He says it. He's the Pope. He wrote an apostolic letter. You can't ignore that. Okay? Either he's the Pope and is in charge and says this is what happened, and I by this I'm obeying heaven, or not. Okay, so it's going to take a lot to go against that, if you can at all. All right, let me see, what else do we have here? Do you think, Al says, do you think there will be the New World Order and then the 3 days? No, I don't think there's going to be the 3 days of darkness at all, because their prophecies contradict one another. And New World Order, it's here. It's probably coming. Who knows how it's going to unfold? I'm sure it plays a big part in where we are today and where we will be for the future. That's a reality. Deborah says, does that mean a pope will eventually consecrate Russia? I hope so. When Poland was consecrated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, it went from communist and atheist country to nearly completely Catholic. Yeah, I mean, what I was saying before was that, Our Lady didn't come to John Paul II and said, would you please do me a correct consecration? That didn't happen. He took it upon himself to do this consecration. Some might say that, okay, received a blessing from that, because the Berlin Wall came down. Okay, I'll give you that much. But between that, as I said, you've got the Bosnia-Herzegovina thing, you've got the Gulf War thing, you've got the Assisi thing. It's like, man, what a mixed bag that is. Okay, so And then if a pope says now in 2021 or 2031, we were missing, let's consecrate Russia. First, heaven didn't say consecrate Russia. If heaven comes back and says, consecrate Russia, you've been missing it for, 90 years or more, please do it now. Yeah, okay. We have all the evidence we need. Let's go consecrate Russia. Because apparently that's still a problem because heaven sees it as a problem. But heaven's not going to do that. Why? Because Russia's not a problem anymore. Russia's a nation amongst the nations of the world, kept there to keep peace because we have a balance of power. And it's, inviting Christianity in by the truckloads, whereas in 1917 it wasn't. So it's completely changed. There would be no reason to consecrate Russia. Okay? All right. That's over. That time period's over. All right. It was over in the 1950s. We should have recognized it a long time ago. All right. If sedevacantism were true, John Paul I was the last pope. Yeah, well, fortunately, sedevacantism is not true. So you don't want to go down that alley. Al. Yeah, there's a good one, David. Very good. In Acts 27, Paul told those in the ship with him not to jump ship lest they perish, but stay in the ship and you will be saved. That whole chapter, Acts 27, David, is a minefield, not minefield, a gold mine, I should say, not a minefield, a gold mine of a apocalyptic parable, if you want to put it that way. The ship represents the church. It gets almost shipwrecked. People almost lose their lives. Paul says, no, stay in the ship. I worked that out years ago, and it is just amazing how the apocalyptic parable imagery just drips from it. It's absolutely amazing. It's an interesting chapter because you ask yourself, why is this chapter in the Bible? Because it's the whole chapter of the shipwreck, basically. They start out and then they go and meet the rough waters and this and that. And it's like, why all the detail? What could be the purpose of this? Now, first of all, it lends to the historicity of the New Testament because no one could write all these details down who wasn't there and saw it for themselves. And so this lends to the reality of the New Testament. This is not made up stuff. This really happened. Look at the detail in this shipwreck in Acts 27. Compare that to Noah in Genesis 6-9, when it talks about Noah building the ark and he got finished on this particular day, and God shut the door on that day, and 7 days later he did this, and it reads like a newspaper account, and for 3 chapters. And that tells us what? It tells us of the reality, the historicity of this thing, because you could not write those details down, those numbers that are there. I think there's over 50 numbers that are used in those 3 chapters, without knowing what was exactly going on, you see. So the more detail that the scripture puts into its narratives, the greater it lends to its own authenticity. Okay. Same thing with Acts 27. This is one of the most intriguing chapters in the whole New Testament. And you make a good point there. Shelley says, Russia is actually an inspiration right now. Russian Orthodoxy is growing like crazy there. They are building hundreds of cathedrals. There is such depth in Russian Orthodox music, and I'm trad. Yeah, thank you for that, Shelley. Yeah, I mean, the more you investigate Russia right now, I mean, I was totally amazed when I started turning the pages and saw what was going on there, because I never expected that. But yeah, it's, talk about a conversion. My goodness. Now, there's some people out there, that think that Russia has to convert to Catholicism in order for Fatima to be fulfilled. I don't think so. I don't think that's because heaven wasn't complaining about Russia prior to 1917. Okay. Yeah, they're not Catholic yet, but, they're Christian. They're Christian. Okay. And if they go back to where they were before 1917, well, that's a conversion. They were not what they were before in 1917 because they were totally atheistic. And now they go right back to where they were before. That's a conversion. Okay? That's all heaven is expecting. Why? So we can live in peace. That's the whole reason for it. There was World War I and then there was World War II. Well, we don't want that. That's not conducive to preaching the gospel and bringing people into the kingdom. That's just totally destroys everything, including churches, which is what Lenin started to do, and Stalin especially. And started shooting Orthodox priests, and all kinds of things were going on there. Well, that's not conducive to preaching the gospel. So the whole thing is based on, we want peace so the gospel can go forth, and we save as many people as we can before they die. Okay, but if they're taken prematurely in war, well, the chances of them becoming Christian is nil. Okay, so peace is good for everybody, because peace allows every sector of society to do its job. And that's the optimal position that we want on this earth. Okay. Yeah, Greek Orthodox Church is in union with Rome and is second largest church on earth. We got 250 million people or more. Shelley says, I believe that if we get a good Holy Father, I don't think it would take much for them to be reunited with the church. I tend to agree with you there, especially the condition Russia is in now, the spiritual condition. Russian Orthodoxy has been a real, they're just very proud of their faith. And I don't know what it's going to take for them to come back. Let's just say there's issues to be discussed, and worked out. I just can't see the filioque issue being I mean, I know it's important, but man, this is a theological, esoteric concept that we hardly understand the Trinity, let alone have the two lungs of Christianity split apart because of one facet of this enigma called the Trinity. I mean, it just seems so, I don't know. It just, that would disrupt our unity for 1,000 years. They almost got back together in the 1400s. But something happened, and I think it was political, that split them apart again, and they've never been close since. But who knows? Practically speaking, I don't think it's going to happen. But if I don't speak practically, and if I speak more wishful thinking, I think it could happen. All right. IDK, what is that? I can't understand what IDK is. If Francis is Pope or not, but I think the question isn't important because they are all Freemasons anyway. Are you guys having a conversation here? And you're not including me in this. Yeah, you guys are having a conversation. David says, Father Mitch Pacwa said after the Pachamama incident, all churches must be reconsecrated or we are going to pay for it. And then the pandemic hit. Yeah, see what I mean about China? That's where it came from. And God could be using them as his arm of justice, whereas he used Russia before. All right. Claudia says, Jesus really leaves all freedom, sadly for us. Thank you for your expose, and God bless you. Like many examples in Moses did not enter Canaan when God told him, but yeah, I'm not sure what point you're making there, Claudia, but you got some good thoughts, that's for sure. Yeah, even I always read that story with amazement. Moses himself, God raised him up for 40 years to lead Israel out of Egypt, travels through the desert with them for 40 years, puts up with all their shenanigans, and then he himself can't even go into the land of Canaan. Oh, the tragedies of humankind, my goodness. Yeah, and that's all because God said, strike the rock once, and Moses was angry at God because he had to look for water, and he struck the rock twice. Just for that, he was not allowed into the land of Canaan. He was going to die in the desert. So you don't mess with God. You know, God tells you to consecrate Russia, you better consecrate Russia. I just shudder to think what happened to Pius XI. I mean, for 10 years, he just ignored and the Lord came to him twice and warned him, you know, if you don't do this, you're going to suffer the fate of the kings of France. I mean, I just shudder at he could be in hell for all we know, for that negligence. All I can tell you is from reading the Old Testament, the story about Moses, don't mess with God. People catch up with you, and sometimes sooner than you think. Some of those stories in the Old Testament make my hair curl. You know, I mean, God is a merciful God, but when he comes in judgment, wow, look out. All right. Paul VI in truth did almost nothing. You guys are talking about, I want to comment here. He wrote 2 encyclicals and nothing else. Well, that could be one way to look at it now. Well, he did write one of the most important encyclicals the church has ever had, Humanae Vitae. He is a strange bird, man. I just can't figure him out. He wrote some of the best defensive papers, letters, defending scripture that I've ever seen a pope write. He was good there. Humanae Vitae, he had 64 advisors, and 60 of them were against his encyclical. They wanted birth control. He stood against all of them. But of course, you know, that's what we were promised as from Jesus. That when it comes to doctrine, he's not going to let the Pope lead us astray. But the other thing about him is, you know, we covered this before in our shows. I read from Randy Engel's book, the rite of sodomy. Basically, the whole homosexual movement started with Paul VI in the 20th century. That's why our seminaries are filled with homosexuals now, because of him. And he was one. We know who he went out with. We know their names. So he's a total enigma. He was definitely a politician in the 1940s under Pius XII, and Pius XII didn't like him. Wanted to cast him away. Put him in, made him the Archbishop of Milan, just to get him out of the Vatican. And so he, he consorted with mafiosos, and he corrupted the Vatican Bank, or he allowed it to be corrupted. And oh my gosh. He's just, boy, you guys are really having a conversation. David would not come against King Saul because he was God's anointed. Korah came against Moses, and he went down into hell with his family. Very good. Thank you, David. And as Paul says, those stories in the Old Testament were written for our benefit in the New Testament, so that we do not make the same mistakes like they did. Paul says that in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 6 and 10, verse 11, in case you want to look those up. Chaldean says, would you be willing to debate a pastor by the name of Anthony Rogers on Sola Scriptura, since James White was not responsive to your request? Anthony Rogers is an experienced debater. Well, you're going to have to send me the curriculum vitae of Mr. Rogers. I want to see where he come from, where he came from, and his education, and especially if he knows the languages of the Bible, Greek and Hebrew. Because I'm not just going to debate anybody on Sola Scriptura. Okay. I want to see where he's debated. I want to see how long he's been around. I'd like to see a videotape of him. And, if everything matches up, yeah, I would definitely consider it. I don't consider myself much of a debater these days, except I did have a debate on Saturday. But yeah, send me that stuff at my email, which is sungenis@aol.com, and I'll be glad to answer you. All right. See if you have any more questions tonight. Stephanie says, how much do you think the cameras and fame have affected the popes? Oh, yeah. Well, we can't know for sure there, Stephanie, but yeah, I've often thought about that question myself. As far as John Paul II, I hate to pick on the man again, but he was an actor. That's how he started his professional life, as an actor, back in the 30s and 40s, was it? And that smile that famous smile that he had did not come by chance. Okay, that's a well-cultivated smile that you form behind the camera or on the stage, and it becomes part of you. So, yeah, and then he names himself the Bishop in White. I mean, come on. That was a stretch. But that may be, I hate to accuse him, but I'm just throwing out the possibilities. If there is any pope who was affected by fame, I think it was John Paul II. I think it went to his head. I think that's the very reason why he could not fathom that it's his pontificate that had the greatest growth of the homosexual pedophile issue. He just could not fathom that he was so great of a pope. He did all these wonderful things that would be in the underneath the rug of his pontificate. That was just too much for him to grasp. And that's why he never grasped it until the day he died. He just never grasped it. Now but at the same time, those that were accused, like Cardinal Law in Boston, the Pope scuttled him off to Rome to save him from the Boston prosecutor. So yeah, and that just shows you what was in his mind. I think that happened, 2001, 2002, right around there. And I don't think we've heard from Cardinal Law since. He's probably dead, and we don't even know it. So, but that just goes right along with his mentality that, it's all a conspiracy against the church. All this pedophile, homosexual stuff. Let's see what else we have here. All right, we already dealt with that one. Okay, so Latin Patriot says, have you shared this on Coast to Coast AM? No, I haven't been invited, so I haven't had the chance. We were on Coast to Coast about 5 years ago about our movie, The Principal. I let Rick do that one, and he did a great job. But I've never been on Coast to Coast myself. So Deborah says, when heaven converted the populace to Christianity in the 16th century in the New World through Our Lady of Guadalupe, it didn't convert the people to any type of Christianity. It converted the people to the Catholic Church. Orthodoxy is schismatic. Unless you're Catholic, how can you call yourself a Christian? There is only one faith. Ephesians 4:5. This faith is heralded from Rome throughout the world. Yeah, Deborah, I understand your question. It's a little bit more complicated than that, okay? There is only one faith, like Ephesians 4:5 says, one faith, one Lord, one baptism. Okay, now the Orthodox don't have another baptism. They don't have another Lord, and they don't have another faith. Okay, they have the Christian faith, they have Christian baptism, and they believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God who died for our sins. Okay, so they fulfill the criteria. There are some things, however, that they don't buy. Okay, Matthew 16, like you mentioned here. Okay, they have trouble with the Pope. That doesn't mean they can't be Christian. Okay, Christianity is more, when Eugene IV and Boniface VIII laid down their dictums about, you had to be remaining in the Catholic Church. That's if you were in the Catholic Church to begin with. Okay, they've already been outside the Catholic Church since 1054. So it's not a matter of them maintaining their membership in the Catholic Church. Okay, there was this whole idea back in those days in 1300s or 1400s when the Jews started to get popular and proliferate through Europe that, well, we don't need the Catholic Church. We can be saved in the Jewish religion. And the Pope said, no, that's not the way it works. Okay. You might be able to be saved as a Jew because you have invincible ignorance and you've led a life that's pleasing to God. And as Pius IX said, God will look with mercy on you. The odds of that happening are not great, but it's possible. But Boniface VIII and Eugene IV were talking about people who thought that they could leave the Catholic Church, not be under the jurisdiction of the Catholic Church, and go out and make their own religion. And that was in the time of Wycliffe, the Protestant, and a lot of other Meister Eckhart and all those people who were, basically feeling their oats and saying, do we really need to be in the Catholic Church? And Wycliffe, of course, decided no and went his own way, and so did the Huguenots and the Hussites and all those people. And the Pope said, look, you can't go start your own church and think that you're saved. There's only one church. Okay. But with the Orthodox, they were so close to the church in many respects, and they carry the priesthood. See, that's another thing, which means if they carry the priesthood, then they also carry the sacraments, and the sacraments are for salvation: baptism, confirmation, the Eucharist, holy orders, all those, they either are giving us salvation or they promote salvation. So if the Orthodox have the priesthood, not much you can say about them not being Christians. Okay. That's the way the church has looked at it. It's never said that people in the Orthodox Church can't be saved. So it's a little bit more complicated than what you're saying here. You can, take scriptures, but you have to look at them in context. Okay, and there's a big context around Ephesians 4:5 that we've already mentioned. So you got to be a little careful in how you interpret those. So my question is, how can you say Russia is consecrated when it isn't Catholic? Because consecration doesn't mean that Russia is going to become Catholic. That's why. Okay. The whole thing about Russia was consecrated so that the world will have peace. Okay. And later Russia would be converted. Well, what does converted mean in the context? Okay. Well, Russia was a Christian nation prior to 1917. Then they became atheists, totally atheist. And they were run by atheists. Before, they were run by Nicholas and Alexandra, who were Christians and lived the Christian life. Now they're run by Lenin and Stalin, who are total atheists and hate Christianity. Okay, so in the context, the conversion of Russia is talking about converting them back to where they were before Lenin and Stalin, you see. And by that, the world's going to have peace. Okay, so that's how it all fits together. Our Lady never said, convert Russia to Catholicism. She never asked for that. She just said convert Russia from what they were before and bring them back to that place. And that's what the consecration would do. Okay. All right. Got 4 minutes left here. Let me see. Holy Faith Media, Azel Luza. Is it more a problem of Russia or the Russia errors that came out of her during the intended close down of the Soviet Union? Yeah, it was both. I mean, but, in order to have the errors, you have to have the people make the errors. Okay, so one follows the other, cause and effect. But the errors of Russia were what? That there is no God. Atheism. That's what they were promoting. That Christianity is just an illusion. That's an error. And you spread this throughout the world, and you're going to have problems, big problems. And we still have them today because of that. Okay, but that was the error of Russia. Colin says, well said, Robert. I really enjoyed that insight. I was just sitting back, taking it all in. Awesome. Thank you. Hope you're feeling better. Yes, feeling better. Thank you, Colin, for your concern. Appreciate that. Yeah, Diddy Kong, I already answered that about the 100 years thing. I wouldn't worry about that. I'm sorry, but it's over. There's nothing to worry about with Fatima, except the unfolding of the third secret, which we are seeing presently in the Vatican. Okay, thank you for this video and your explanation of Fatima. You are right. China is a threat and what we need to worry about. Julie says, I agree. Deborah says, and you did say that the world received a lesser blessing with lesser grace. So it makes sense that Russia at least has valid sacraments. However, it is with a schismatic church. It isn't with God's ordained church. Yeah, I agree. You know, they do have that label, but that doesn't mean, you know, that people in Russia can't be saved. Okay, so let's see. Holy Faith Media says, Robert, what do you say to the fact that Russia has not converted to the Catholic faith? That's not what the consecration was asking for. See, if Our Lady wanted Russia to convert to the Catholic faith, that's what she would have said. I want the conversion of Russia to the Catholic faith. That's not what she said. Okay. And it would be unrealistic to think that that's going to happen. Okay. It never happens like that. It just never happens. I mean, the one thing that we could look at, maybe Our Lady of Guadalupe in the 1500s when all these pagans came to Christianity, but that's not converting from, you know, one schismatic group to, you know, to real Catholicism. That's, I mean, I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying that's not what heaven asked for. She asked for the conversion of Russia. What's the context? You have to ask yourself, what's the context of that request? The context is that Russia was a Christian nation prior, then it just totally stopped and became an atheistic nation, and a virulent one. Not just atheists, you know, reading books and saying, yeah, I like to be an atheist. You know, a virulent atheist that's going to spread her errors all over the world. These people were serious about their atheism. That's what was worrying heaven. Okay? So that's what needed to be stopped. And that's the context of the conversion of Russia there, to go back to Christianity from the atheism that they assumed in 1917. That's the local context. Okay? So to say that, well, Russia, in order for this to be fulfilled, Russia has to convert to Catholicism, that's not what heaven asked for, and it's unrealistic. Okay? Because that wasn't the problem. The problem was atheism. Heaven didn't point out the problem saying, well, you know, it's been a long time. Russia should be converting to Catholicism now after what, you know, 900 years. That wasn't the problem. Our Lady never even hinted that that was the problem. Okay. All right. All right. So it's 10 after. I'm only halfway through I'm not even halfway through. So I will take these questions down. It's 10 o'clock. That's what I'm trying to say. I got to go. I'm a tired boy tonight. Had a long day. So I'll look over your questions, and then if I have any of them I want to answer tomorrow on tomorrow's show, beginning at 10 o'clock, we will do that. Now, tomorrow, as I said, we'll have a new topic for January the 6th, and that is John Paul II a saint? You're probably going to be surprised at my answer to this. But we will cover that tomorrow for the first, hopefully, half hour. And I'm going to try not to go overboard on that one because I just went overboard tonight on the first question. And because I spent 50 minutes on it. All right. So I look forward to seeing you guys all tomorrow, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Until then, please pray for me, and please go visit robertsongenis.org. There you can find all kinds of books and papers and debates and DVDs, movies, CDs, all kinds of things there for you, for your education pleasure. And you'll also find a donation button there. So press that and donate a few dollars. Help me keep going. It'll be much appreciated. And God bless you all. And please stay healthy. And we'll see you tomorrow night.